There's a castle in Westeros that has never been taken by assault, not in thousands of years. Armies have looked up at it and gone home. It sits on the shoulder of a mountain. 7 white towers, so high that clouds pass underneath it. And the standard line is that it's impregnable. And that's not marketing. It's basically true. If your plan is to march men up there and take it by force, you will lose, and you will lose badly. So here's the question nobody asks. If the Eyrie is that strong, why has it never actually mattered? Why doesn't anybody plan a campaign around it? Why, when the Vale gets pulled into a war, does the fighting tend to happen somewhere else? For a castle with a perfect record, it has a strange habit of being completely irrelevant to whatever war is going on. And I think the answer is that we've been measuring it wrong. Because when we say a castle is strong, we usually mean it survives a siege. And almost nobody actually knows what a siege is. A siege is not a battle. Sieges are not usually won by climbing walls, and they're very rarely won by breaking them. The overwhelming majority of sieges in real history were won by sitting down. You surround the place, you cut what goes in, and you wait. The wall never loses. The pantry loses. Storming a castle is what you do when you're impatient or desperate, or you've heard a relief army is coming. It's the expensive option. The cheap option is a chair. So the real question isn't, can you storm the Eyrie? Obviously you can't. The real question is, what happens when somebody who understands sieges shows up, looks at that mountain, and decides not to climb it at all? That's the thesis. The Eyrie cannot be taken by assault, which is exactly why no competent enemy would ever attempt one. And against the kind of siege people actually fight, patient, boring, seated, the Eyrie is one of the weakest castles in Westeros. And I don't have to prove that with a hypothetical, because the Arryns prove it themselves every single winter. And I'll get to that, because it's the best part. Let's start with what the castle is actually built to stop. Look at the approach, and it's genuinely impressive. To get to the Eyrie, you first have to get into the Vale, which means the Bloody Gate, a fortress wedged into a pass, so narrow that numbers stop helping you. Get past that, and you reach the Gates of the Moon, a proper castle at the base of the mountain, with a moat and a drawbridge, and a gatehouse. Then you start climbing. The path up the Giant's Lance is a track that mules can handle and horses can't, and it's watched by 3 way castles stacked up the mountain. Stone, then snow, then sky. All of them can drop rocks and oil on you while you're strung out single file on a goat trail. And when you finally get past the last one, there's still a stretch of sheer rock, and the only way up is a winch basket or a carved chimney, which means the final step of your grand assault is asking the people inside very nicely to pull you up. That is a beautiful defense. It's layered, it's redundant, it uses the terrain perfectly, and every single layer of it is designed to defeat exactly one thing: an enemy climbing up at you, which is the one thing no competent commander would ever do. Think about who's actually attacking you in Westeros. A lord with an army, a supply train, and a campaign season. That man does not look at a single-file mule track under 3 way castles and think, yes, this is where I want to spend my nights. He isn't stupid. He's had this conversation before at every other castle he's ever taken. He knows what a siege is. So the entire elaborate architecture of the Eyrie is a solution to a problem your enemy has no intention of giving you. And I want to be fair here, because there's a version of that which is a compliment. Deterrence is real. If your walls are so obviously unbeatable that nobody attacks, the walls worked. But deterrence only counts if the enemy actually wanted the thing you're defending. And that's where the Eyrie has a problem, because the Eyrie isn't on the road to anywhere. It doesn't control a crossing. It doesn't sit on a trade route. It doesn't block an army's path. The things that matter in the Vale, the pass, the road, the harvest, the men, are all down at the bottom. The Eyrie guards a shoulder of rock with 7 towers on it. So the enemy walks past it, takes everything below, and leaves you up there, undefeated, holding the only piece of the Vale nobody wanted. Which brings us to the part that actually decides the siege. And it's not the walls, it's the stairs. Here's the thing about a castle in the sky. Nothing grows up there. There's no farmland on the side of a mountain, no pasture, no fields. The books are very specific about this in a way that's easy to skim past. The Eyrie doesn't even keep chickens or pigs, not a shortage of them. It doesn't keep them. Fresh food comes up from the valley, carried by a guide with a mule train, and that's not a wartime emergency measure. That's just Tuesday. That's the normal, peacetime, everything is fine operating condition of the castle. So every single thing the Eyrie eats begins its journey underneath the Eyrie. Now put a besieger at the bottom of that mountain, not climbing, just there. Say he takes the Gates of the Moon. That's not free. It's a stout castle with a moat and a gatehouse, and it deserves respect. But it's a castle on flat ground. It can be surrounded, and its garrison is commonly given. as fewer than 300. It's a normal military problem with normal military answers, which is more than you can say for the thing above it. And if he does take it, he owns the bottom of the only road. He doesn't need to break a wall. He doesn't need to fight the way castles, because way castles guard a path, and a path is only useful to you if you're using it. He just needs a chair and some patience. And notice what those 3 way castles have quietly become. Stone, snow, and sky are choke points, and choke points work in both directions. They're brilliant at slowing an enemy coming up. They're equally brilliant at slowing your own mule train coming up, which is fine when the mule train is yours, and catastrophic the moment the bottom of the road isn't. Every feature that makes the climb hard for him makes the resupply hard for you. You cannot have a route that's difficult to attack and easy to feed. It's the same route, and it's worth being concrete about what that resupply actually is, because I think people picture something more industrial than it is. The climb takes about half a day. The path is narrow enough that horses can't do it, so you're moving goods by mule, in single file, along a track cut into a mountainside, in a place where the weather is trying to kill you for most of the year. That is not a supply line. That is a chore. It works beautifully for a household, which is what it was built for. It works for a lord, a family, some servants, and a few hundred guards eating normal amounts of food in normal times. It does not scale. You cannot suddenly triple it because there's a war on, and you certainly cannot stockpile a siege's worth of grain by sending more mules up a goat path in autumn. And now I have to be fair to the Eyrie, because there's a fact here that cuts against me, and it's a big one. The Eyrie's granary is enormous. The books say it's as large as the granaries in castles, many times its size, comparable to Winterfell's. So the cheap version of my argument, the one where the mule stops coming and everyone up there is starving by spring, does not work. Conceded. You cannot quickly starve the Eyrie. But look at what else that same passage tells you the castle doesn't have, because this is the part nobody quotes. The Eyrie has no stables, it has no kennels, and critically, it has no smithy. Sit with the smithy for a second. A castle under siege is not a building, it's a workshop. Blades chip, armor splits, hinges shear, bolts bend, and every single one of those things is fixed by a man with a forge. A fortress without a smithy cannot repair itself. It can only wear out, so the Eyrie can feed a garrison for a long time, and cannot maintain one for very long at all, which is a strange thing to be true of the safest castle in the world. And then there's the machine nobody thinks about. The supplies don't float up. Baskets and great oaken buckets ride iron chains between the last way castle and the castle above, and the winches that haul them are turned by oxen, living animals, in a castle with no stables, which means the Eyrie's entire lifting system depends on livestock. It isn't set up to keep in a place with nothing to graze them on. And here's the detail that I genuinely think is the most damning thing in the whole story. When the Arryns go down for winter, they slaughter the oxen and leave the carcasses for the falcons. They don't stable them. They don't bring them down. They kill the engine of their own supply lift every single year on purpose, because there is no way to keep it alive up there. So the classic siege question, who runs out first, turns out to be the wrong question. Food isn't a constraint. The constraint is everything else. The forage you don't have, the animals you can't keep, and the season that's coming, whether anyone attacks you or not. But all of that is still hypothetical. And I said I wouldn't need a hypothetical. So let's talk about the thing that makes this whole argument almost unfair. Every winter, the Arryns leave. That's canon, and it's not a crisis, and it's not a defeat. It's just the schedule. The Eyrie is the summer seat. When the snows start, the entire household packs up and goes down the mountain to the gates of the moon, and they stay there until spring. The castle gets too cold to live in, and the way becomes impassable with snow and ice. The books put it about as bluntly as you could ask for. The Eyrie may be impregnable, but it's about to be inaccessible, too, and the way down gets more dangerous every day. Sit with what that means. The Eyrie is a fortress that cannot be occupied during winter, and a besieger's entire job is to make a castle uninhabitable and cut it off. The Eyrie does both of those things to itself, for free, on an annual schedule, without an enemy even being present. Nature runs a perfect siege every year and wins every time, and the Arryns don't even fight it. They surrender in advance. They call it moving house. And now put that next to the fact that in Westeros, the wars that decide things tend to run long, and winter is exactly when a long war grinds into attrition, when a strong castle is supposed to be worth the most. That's the moment the Eyrie switches off. Your invincible fortress has a seasonal closure notice on it, right when you need it. Meanwhile, the family retreats. To where? The Gates of the Moon, which, and I love this detail, is the bigger castle. Stouter walls, moat, drawbridge, portcullis, a real garrison. So the Arryns spend a chunk of every year admitting through their own behavior which of their two castles is actually livable. And it's the one on the ground. There's one more thing, and it's short, but it matters. Height is not a defense. Height is a bet. It's a bet that your enemy has to come from below. And that's usually a great bet, right up until it isn't. And the thing about that kind of bet is that it doesn't degrade gracefully. It doesn't get slowly worse. It goes from total to zero in an afternoon. The Eyrie has cashed that out twice. When Visenya Targaryen landed a dragon in the courtyard, the castle didn't fall after a long fight. It surrendered. And later, when House Arryn seized the place and threw his own brother out the moon door, and Maegor turned up on Balerion, the Eyrie's own garrison grabbed Jonas and threw him out the moon door too. Both times, the most impregnable castle in Westeros changed hands, and no one laid a hand on the walls. In its whole history, the two occasions it actually changed owner, the defenses were not the deciding factor even once. Okay, counter-argument, and it's a good one. You could say the record speaks for itself. Thousands of years, never taken by storm. No other great castle can claim that. And you could point out that my patient besieger isn't as comfortable as I'm making him sound because he's parked deep in the Vale, in a valley full of Vale lords who'd like him gone. Mountain clans who'd like his horses, with the Bloody Gate behind him, and a long supply line of his own. Maybe he starves first. And finally, the strongest version. The Eyrie was never meant to be a war fortress. It's a dynastic refuge. Its job is to keep the family alive when everything else has gone wrong. And, measured against that job, its record is close to perfect. That's a real argument. And I'd say 2 of those 3 points are fair. Here's why it still doesn't hold. The record is inflated because a castle isn't tested by being left alone. The Eyrie has survived thousands of years, mostly because taking it was never worth anyone's time. Nobody needs it. It doesn't unlock the Vale. It doesn't block a road. And if you control the bottom of the mountain, you control everything the top depends on. An unconquered castle that your enemy can simply ignore doesn't have a defensive record. It has an alibi. The besieger's discomfort argument is actually my argument wearing a hat. Yes, sitting at the base of the giant's lance is annoying. That's precisely why nobody bothers. But that's a statement about the Eyrie being not worth attacking, not about it being hard to beat. Those are very different compliments. And the refuge argument has a hole in the roof, which is that the refuge closes for the season. A shelter that expels you every winter isn't a shelter. It's a summer house with a very good view. And the 2 times the Arryns genuinely needed those walls to save them, once against a dragon in the yard, once against their own garrison, the walls did nothing at all. So would the Eyrie survive a real siege, not the imaginary one, with ladders and boiling oil and heroic knights on a goat path? The real one, a patient man at the bottom of the mountain with nothing better to do. No, a patient siege could neutralize it, without ever storming the castle, because the Eyrie already does much of a besieger's work by design. The Eyrie is a fortress that solved the exciting problem perfectly, and the boring problem not at all. It can beat any army that agrees to fight it on its own terms, and it has no answer whatsoever for an enemy who simply declines. The Arryn words are as high as honor, and honestly, that's the whole thing right there. They built the safest room in Westeros and put it somewhere nobody needed to go, and every winter they lock the door and walk down the mountain, and the strongest castle in the world spends half its life empty, waiting for a siege that never comes because it was never worth the trip.